John chapter 7, for those of you who have not been with us. And we're going to embrace hindsight today. In John chapter 7, Jesus had not died yet, he had not raised from the dead yet, he had not ascended yet, and he's saying things to the people in John chapter 7 about what's going to come in the future, and they're confused because they don't know what's coming in the future, and they're trying to figure it out. And watch them try to figure it out. But the benefit of being nearly 2,000 years after Jesus is that we have the rest of the story. We can look back, hindsight's 20/20, they say. We can look back through what actually happened in history, and we get the full story, we get the full picture. So what was confusing to the crowds in John chapter 7 should not be confusing to us with the rest of the Bible. It should not be confusing to us by the time we get through today. So that's the benefit of hindsight. We're going to look at that as we go. We said last week and the week before and the week before that and the week before that Jesus is speaking to a mixed crowd in John chapter 7. Some people believe him, believe in the signs that he's doing. Some people want to kill him. Some people are just confused about him. Some people are scared. Some people are in denial. And of people that Jesus is speaking to in the temple in John chapter 7 at the Feast of Booths. So last week, I read to you, we finished in John chapter 7, verse 31. So we're going to pick up in, I'll read verse 31 again, and then we'll pick up in verse 32. We'll go into this next section. And the question is, in this section, where is Jesus going? Last week, if you watched the Intersect Service, I didn't quite go there, but if you watched the worship center services, we watched Jesus explain where he's from. So last week, when he's trying to get the crowds are trying to answer the question, is he the Messiah or is he not? He tells them where he's from. And then this week, they're still trying to answer the question, is he the Messiah or is he not? And this week, he's going to tell them where he is going. Where he's from and where he's going are both meant to tell you and I very clearly that he's the Messiah. The crowds don't get it, but I think we'll get it by the end here. So, verse 31, where we left off in John chapter 7, is this. Yet many of the people believed in him. They said, when the Christ appears, will he do more signs than this man does? So, some people in the crowd are believing not because they understand exactly that he's the Messiah, but they're seeing the fact that he's healing people and feeding people and walking on water, and they're like, well, is anybody going to do more signs than this when they come? And so they believe as a result of that. Some people in the crowd's not so convinced. This is verse 32. The Pharisees heard the crowd muttering these things about him, and the chief priests and the Pharisees sent officers to arrest him. Then Jesus said, I will be with you a little longer, and then I am going to him who sent me. So, in a nutshell, time is short. I'll be with you a little while longer. If you were with us at the beginning of John chapter 7, I said that John chapter 7 marks a shift in Jesus' life. About everything from John chapter 7 until his death is going to be about a 6-month time period. So there's a lot of scripture in the last 6 months of Jesus' life. And so when he says, I'll be with you a little longer, he literally means a little longer. It's not going to be long until they hang him up on a tree. And then he says, I'm going to the one who sent me. Now, if you either haven't been with us, you didn't watch my message from last week, you didn't watch anybody's message from last week on John chapter 7, verse 25 to 31, or you're not familiar with John chapter 7, or you haven't been with us, and you're like the crowds, essentially, at this point, saying, who's the one who sent you? Jesus says, I'm going to return to the one that sent me, and you're going, who's that? I'm going to read to you a couple verses from chapter 5, a couple verses from chapter 6, and then last week the verses that we looked at right towards the end, because the answer is very clear. The one who sent Jesus. This is from John chapter 5, verse 23, the second half of verse 23. Jesus says this, whoever does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him. Then, a few verses later, in 37, the first half of John 5, 37, Jesus says this, and the Father who sent me has borne witness himself about me. So, in John 5:23, he says, whoever does not honor the Father does not honor the Son. Whoever does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him. So, Father sent the Son. And who's the Father and who's the Son? We'll figure that out a little later in John 5. The Father, Jesus says, has sent me. So clearly, he is being sent by the Father who's in heaven. Then John chapter 6, Jesus is speaking to the crowds in Galilee. He says this, "Truly, truly, I say to you." This is John chapter 6, verse 32 and 33. "Truly, truly, I say to you, it was not Moses who gave me the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." And then a couple verses later, in 6:41, he says, "I am the bread that came down from heaven." So the Father, the Son, and Jesus says, "I am the bread that the Father sent down from heaven." Essentially saying, I came down from heaven. And then John 6:46, he claims to be the only one that has come down from heaven. He says, "Not that anyone has seen the Father except he who is from God. He has seen the Father." So there's Father in heaven, sends the Son, the sent, and Jesus is now saying in John chapter 7 that he's going to, in a little while, return to the one who sent him. And this is from last week, John chapter 7, verse 28, 29. Jesus says to the crowd, "You know me and where I am from, but I have not come on my own accord, but he who sent me is true, and it's him you do not know, but I know him because he sent me, for I come from him." So even if you're confused in John chapter 7, like the crowds, when Jesus says, "I'll be with you a little longer, and then I'm going to him who sent me," you should not be confused if you look back at John chapter 5 and John chapter 6. Jesus clearly sets this up for the Jews, for those in Galilee. There's a Father in heaven who sent the Son. He's the Son. He's from heaven. And now he's saying he's going to return there. And then Jesus says this in 7:34. "You will seek me and you will not find me. Where I am, you cannot come." And again, if you listen to my message from last week when I talked about why it's important that Jesus is from the Father, or that essentially means that he's deity, he's God. This is also another reason to understand why Jesus is so much more than just you and I, or humanity. If Jesus is not deity, if he's not from God, which he just said in the last section, then he cannot stand in the presence of God and live. So the rest of the Bible tells us that you and I are unrighteous, and we cannot stand in the presence of God without his wrath, his righteousness consuming us. It goes all the way back to Exodus chapter 30, verse 20, where God says to Moses, "You cannot see my face, for no man can see me and live." So for Jesus to say, number one, I come from the Father, and then number two, I'm going to the Father in a little while, if he's only human, he cannot go to the Father. Or if he does, that will be the end of him, be consumed by the wrath of God. So you're listening to Jesus balance the fact that he's the Messiah, he's deity, and you and I are not. The reality of our nature before God is very different than his. And the Jews are confused by this. Even if they believe that he's the Messiah, they don't understand that he's God. They haven't put those pieces together yet. And so here's their questions in John chapter 7, verse 35 and 36. These are the last two verses we'll cover today. And then we're going to go into the New Testament a bit and figure out if what Jesus actually said actually happened or not. This is the crowd's response, though. Verse 35, "The Jews said to one another, 'Where does this man intend to go that we might find him? Does he intend to go to the dispersion among the Greeks and teach the Greeks?'" So they were talking about the Jews who were north of Jerusalem. They were living among the Greeks. So they're like, maybe he's going to go to the Greeks. Maybe he's going to go to the dispersion among the Greeks, which is the Jews among the Greeks. And he's going to teach them. We don't know. And then verse 36. "What does he mean by saying, 'You will seek me and you will not find me. Where I am, you cannot come'?" They didn't understand at the time that Jesus was going to God, that he had come from God, and he had come down to earth as the incarnate Son of God, took on human flesh, and that when he died and resurrected from the dead, he was going to go back to be with God. They didn't understand that, so they thought he was going to a physical place. The irony is that eventually the gospel would go out to the Greeks. It would go out to the dispersion. It would go out to the place where they think Jesus is going to go. Jesus will not go there himself, but he will send his disciples there, and the gospel and his story will go there, and then eventually it will come to us. But the question is, that hinges on whether or not Jesus is the Messiah, is where is Jesus going? when he says, "A little while longer I will be with you, and then I am going to him who sent me." What does that have to do? First of all, did he actually do that? And then what does that have to do with him being the Messiah or not? So you're going to flip to the right, or you're going to scroll a little bit to the right in your Bible to Acts chapter 1, and we'll see exactly where Jesus is going. So by Acts chapter 1, Jesus has lived the rest of the 6 months of his life, and he's been hung on a tree, he's died, he's resurrected 3 days later, and for 40 days he appeared to more than 500 people, eyewitnesses of the resurrection. Then, Acts chapter 1, Jesus tells the disciples to wait for the Holy Spirit, who he's promised to enter in them and live in the midst of them. And he tells them to wait, and then this in Acts chapter 1, verse 9. After he had said these things, he was lifted up, Jesus was lifted up while they were looking on, and a cloud received him out of their sight. And as they were gazing intently into the sky while he was going, behold, 2 men in white clothing stood beside him. They also said, "Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking up into the sky? This Jesus who has been taken up from you into heaven will come in just the same way as you have watched him go into heaven." So Acts chapter 1, verse 9 to 11, we see Jesus actually returning to heaven, or returning to the Father, exactly what he said he would do in John chapter 7. If you're not quite convinced, you should know that the whole rest of the New Testament has this same testimony, that God is now with the Father in heaven. The Son is with the Father in heaven. So go forward a few chapters in Acts chapter 7, where Stephen the martyr, the first person to ever be killed for his faith, where his story is being told by Luke, who's writing the book of Acts. And Stephen is being stoned to death for what he believes in the final moments of his life. This is what Luke records. But he, Stephen, full of the Holy Spirit, gazed into heaven and saw the glory of God, and Jesus standing at the right hand of God. And he said, "Behold, I see the heavens opened, and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God." Jesus standing in this picture is body image, a picture of acceptance. He is standing to receive the righteous one into heaven. And this is what was typical in their culture. People, when somebody would enter and they wanted to honor them, they would stand. And so you literally in this picture see the glory of God and then the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God, welcoming this martyr who was willing to die because he absolutely knew that the story of Jesus was true. Go forward in the New Testament to Hebrews chapter 1, and the writer of Hebrews writes this in verse 3. He, Jesus, is the radiance of the glory of God, the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. After making purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the majesty on high. Now, some of you nitpickers are like, is Jesus sitting or standing in heaven? Like, I mean, which one is it? Or is it both? I mean, does he sit sometimes and stand sometimes? And I don't know the answer to that question, but what I do know is that standing in the culture was a sign of acceptance, and that sitting in the culture is what judges do on the seat of judgment. So when Jesus says in John chapter 5, verse 22, "The Father judges no one, but has given all judgment to the Son, that all may honor the Son just as they honor the Father," it makes perfect sense to me why then the writer of Hebrews would say that Jesus sits at the right hand of the Father, because all judgment was given to him by the Father. And so whether he's sitting or standing in heaven, I don't know, but I do know that he will welcome the righteous who believe in him, and I do know that he will judge everyone accordingly. One last one. There's a bunch more, but I'll give you just one last one. Romans chapter 8, verse 34. This is Paul, the Apostle Paul, says this. "Who is the one who condemns? Jesus Christ is he who died, yes, rather, who is raised, who is at the right hand of God, who also intercedes for us." So at least 4 witnesses in the New Testament. Stephen the martyr, Luke, the one recording his story, the writer of Hebrews, and the Apostle Paul, all will tell you that Jesus is at the right hand of the Father, doing various different things, sometimes judging, sometimes welcoming the righteous, sometimes interceding on behalf of us. But the point is When Jesus says in John chapter 7, a little while longer I will be with you, but then I'm going to the one who sent me. He went to the one who sent him, which is God, and he went to sit at his right hand. There's 4 witnesses for you in the New Testament. Like I said, there's a whole bunch more. We won't go through all of them. So the next question is this: how does that prove anything? How does Jesus going to the right hand of God prove that he's the Messiah? Why, if the crowds are trying to figure out that he's the Messiah, why would Jesus respond with where he's going? How does Jesus going to the right hand of the Father prove that he's the Messiah? And this is where it becomes essential that you know your Old Testament. Because the reality is the Messiah in the Old Testament is the one who sits at the right hand of God. So Psalm 110:1 is a psalm written by David, but it's the psalm written by David about the one who is to come in his bloodline, who would be the messianic Davidic king to rule the everlasting kingdom. So God said to David, I'll send one that will come from your bloodline that will rule on the throne for everlasting. Forever and ever will rule on the throne. And so David writes a psalm about that king someday in the future, and him responding, or God speaking to that king. And this is Psalm 110, it's verse 1. David writes this: the Lord said to my Lord. In other words, David says, the Lord, Yahweh, said to my Lord, the one who is to come through my bloodline, the Davidic king. God said to that one, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool. And you're thinking, well, that could be anybody. I mean, that could be a president, that could be, how do you know that that's Jesus? Then you'd want to know how your New Testament connects to your Old Testament, because the writer of Hebrews made very, very clear, quoted this verse in his book, applying it to Jesus. But then later on in Hebrews chapter 10, listen to this, what the writer of Hebrews says. But when Christ had offered for all time a single sacrifice for sins, he sat down at the right hand of God, waiting for that time until his enemies should be made a footstool for his feet. So the writer of Hebrews looks back through Psalm 110 and says, this is the guy. And we know that this is the guy because he sat down at the right hand of God. So when Jesus says to the crowd, you want to know if I'm the Messiah or not? You're trying to figure this out? Just wait a little while longer, because in a little while I'm going to go to the one who sent me. And when I go to the one who sent me, you will know, or you should know, without a shadow of a doubt, that I am the Messiah, that I was the Davidic king, and that I rule from heaven with God. If that's not convincing to you, and it should be, because that's probably one of the clearest connections in the New Testament for this. There's more. Consider also, we'll just look at one more. Consider also Daniel chapter 7. If you were with us in John chapter 3, when the Son of Man title for Jesus was first introduced, I took you from that to Daniel chapter 7. And I said, look in Daniel chapter 7, where the Son of Man, who is the Son of Man in Daniel chapter 7? This is Daniel 7, verse 13. This is a vision that God gave a guy named Daniel. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like the Son of Man. And he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him, and to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples and nations and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. So, the Ancient of Days in Daniel chapter 7 gives the Son of Man a kingdom, a dominion. All peoples and nations and languages serve him, and they serve the Son of Man. So then you want to go through the story of Jesus to Paul writing to the Ephesian church. And he's writing to the Ephesian church in chapter 1 about our inheritance as saints. And he writes to them about our inheritance as saints as a result of the work of the Father in heaven. And this is the work of the Father in heaven in Ephesians chapter 1, starting in verse 20. The great might that he worked in Christ when he raised him from the dead, seated him at the right hand in the heavenly places, far above, listen, all rule and authority and power and dominion, and above every name that is named, not only in this age, but also in the one to come. And he put all things under his feet, and gave him as a head over all things to the church, which is his body, the fullness of him who fulfills all in all. So in Daniel chapter 7, there's one Son of Man who gets a kingdom and a dominion that rules from everlasting to everlasting, all nations, all peoples, all tribes. And then in the book of Ephesians, the Apostle Paul says that the one who has authority to rule above all powers, all dominions, all authority, is the Christ, who he says is Jesus. So, as I said, we get the benefit of hindsight. We're looking back through the writer of Hebrews, we're looking back through Paul, we're looking back through all these different sources, when in the crowds, when Jesus said in John chapter 7, I'm a little while I'm with you, and then I'm going to the one who sent me. They're like, huh? But this is very clear for us, because hindsight's 20/20. We have the rest of the story, we have the rest of the book. Jesus' ascension to the right hand of the Father proves that he's the Messiah. It's the exact question that the crowds were wondering about when Jesus was there. He gave them the answer, they just didn't understand it at the time. You and I should be more than capable of understanding it. The question is, do you believe it? This is the testimony of the Scriptures. It's connected all the way back to King David and farther, if we want to talk about those connections. It's connected through Jesus. It's connected all the way through the New Testament. So the question is, do you believe it or do you not? The crowds didn't understand it, but you have more than enough information to understand it. So you either believe that Jesus is the Messiah or you don't. That's the evidence. Reality is you cannot go to heaven on your own. Jesus can die on a cross and he can ascend to heaven because he is God and he's righteous that way, but you and I are not. It's just the exact reason he tells the crowds, where I'm going, you cannot come. You can try all you want to live a righteous life, get to heaven on your own, but he says to the crowds, where I'm going, you cannot come. He's the mediator. The only ticket in is through him. It's why he says what he says to the crowds. Now, if you're with me last week, you might be thinking the same thing this week as you're thinking last week, which is, that's great. But what does that have to do with anything that we're doing today? And what does that have to do with the fact that I don't even know if my kids are going back to school? What does that have to do with the fact that I'm still stuck at home and I don't know when my job's even going to let us come back to work because they're all scared? Some jobs are taking more precautions now than they were months ago. And so you're thinking, I'm so done being isolated, and I don't understand how Jesus ascending to the right hand of the Father, proving that he's the Messiah, has any bearing on what I'm doing with my life today. So I'll tell you what I said last week, and it's still true this week, which is that right theology gives us hope and gives us peace and gives us rest. So when we believe right about who Jesus is, whether he's the Messiah or not, it starts to change everything else, no matter our circumstances. The question is, do you live with confidence? Everything's a little bit chaos going on around us. Do you live with a constant state of confidence and rest and peace? Or does every time the world twists and turns, you're thrown for a loop? Because you're not grounded in the fact that Jesus has been the Messiah, he's always been the Messiah, he's always going to be the Messiah, and you can trust that. Let me help you. One last thing I want you to think about, and then I'll be done. I want you to get outside of your world for a minute. I want you to get outside of being a parent for a minute. I want you to get outside of being a spouse for a minute. We're not going to stay here long because living outside of reality is a mistake. But I need you to get outside and see maybe for a minute from God's perspective. I need you to get outside of your work life. I need you to get outside of home life. I need you to just have like an out-of-body experience for a second. I need you to see through the eyes of God for a minute. Thousands of years ago, there was a guy named David. And God picked David and then made a promise to him. I am going to, through your bloodline, put a king on the throne who will reign forever and ever. And he makes that promise to a guy named David. And then some hundreds of years later, there's another guy, and he picks that guy out of a horrible situation that the people of God are going through, sticks him in Babylon, and then says to Daniel, gives Daniel this vision. This hopeful vision of one who can actually approach the Ancient of Days. What the people of God are very sure of at the time that Daniel is writing is that God hates them. He's angry with them. He's wrathful. There is no one who wants to stand in the presence of the Ancient of Days while Daniel's alive. But Daniel gets this vision of one who is able to approach the Ancient of Days and receive this everlasting dominion, this kingdom, who will rule righteously over an everlasting kingdom forever and ever. Then Jesus, at the proper time, comes down from heaven, he said. Comes down from heaven. The Word became flesh, lived, dwelt, died, resurrected from the dead. Then he goes back to the Father. Then 2,000 years later, somehow the gospel makes it from the Middle East, through the West, to America, and all the way out to Arizona. So what I'm telling you is that for thousands of years, God has been working out you and me to hear the gospel, to have a book written in our own language. He's been orchestrating your and I's salvation for thousands of years. Most of you and I, there's a few people in our life that we could say have really poured into us. There's some people, maybe you can think of who they are, or a couple names come to mind, and you can think, this person has really poured into me. Maybe they've only spent a couple years, maybe they've recently started pouring into you, or maybe it's been 10 years or 50 years, and you have a spouse that has just been pouring into you for your betterment, for your good, and you have a certain level of affection for them because they have spent just so much time pouring into your life. And I'm trying to get you to get out of that mindset, to understand that for thousands of years, God has been pouring in to make sure that you have a chance to hear the gospel and come to him and respond accordingly. There's no comparison. It should be the affection you feel for that person who's been pouring into your life for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, times a million. Because the God of the Bible has been pouring out his grace and orchestrating every detail so that you would hear the gospel and believe. When you get outside of you, when you get outside of your marriage that is not perfect, when you get outside your kids that are not perfect, your job that's not perfect, and you start to see things from God's perspective, maybe you start to realize why, if God can orchestrate kingdoms and rulers and nations and politicians and people in and the spread of the gospel and the movement, if he can orchestrate all those details of the world and millions of people over time, then why is it that I can't trust him when work is a mess? Why is it that you and I cannot get on board with him and he says, trust me, I've got your kids. I'll bring them back when I need to bring them back. Why is it that we can't trust him to fix our marriage? At some point, we have to allow the fact that God has been orchestrating Jesus as the Messiah for thousands of years and look at that and say, if he can orchestrate God to come from heaven, die, resurrect, and live, then he ought to be able to control my life. He ought to be able to teach me how to live like him. Ought to be able to help me figure out how to deal with my boss, or how to be a better husband. Because right theology about who Jesus is gives us hope. It gives us peace. It allows us to get outside of ourselves and look from the big perspective and say, God is so big. He's so big. And my problems, my dealings are just so minute compared to what he has the capacity to control and be involved in and redeem. Jesus' ascension, it proves that he's the Messiah. Jesus going to the Father proves that he is the Messiah. He's exactly what we need. Pray with me. Got a couple more announcements. We'll be done here. God, we realistically would be nowhere if your son wasn't able to stand in your presence. Because if he wasn't able to stand in your presence, then he wasn't sinless. And if he wasn't sinless, then the penalty he paid for our sins wasn't for our sins, it was for his. And there's really no hope. So God, we praise you this morning because he did ascend to you. Because he was worthy to sit at your right hand. Because if that's true, then there's hope for us. If that's true, then there's a love for us as children of God that is endless. There's a love from a father that would sacrifice a son so that another child could be redeemed, and a willingness from a son to say, I would absolutely give my life for theirs. God, would you help us to just get outside of us and see things from where you are? And God, I know we have to live in reality, so we can't live out of body for our whole lives. We have to interact with people and make real decisions. But when we don't quite know what to do or how everything's going to work out, God, would you give us the mindset to have the peace in you that surpasses understanding? To say, no, I have no question at all that God's in control. And I don't worry about what's going to happen tomorrow because he's fully capable of orchestrating every detail of the event of my life for my good. So God, teach us to rest in that. Thank you that when Jesus, you said that you were going to go to the Father, you did, so that we can have confidence in you. Thanks for the Bible, so that we can look back and know exactly what you said and what you meant. Thanks that we can have confidence in you. God, I pray all these things in